Donna, welcome to Triple C.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you, my friend.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And it's a pleasure to kind of have somebody as well that listens to our episodes. Who's also simultaneously a fan, which is always super exciting
Absolutely.
to have you on. But you do have an interesting tale on itself. Now, usually with Triple C, we just get you to briefly introduce yourself,
Okay.
just so people know who you are, because they might not know who you are, even though that's hard to believe. And then that's when we'll get into the fantastic conversation about a whole bunch of different things.
Okay.
Yes. So go for it.
I like that. All right. Well, gosh, summary of me. Just turned 26 on Monday, so freshly minted
Am I older than
26.
Oh my god.
Yeah, you are.
Fix up your mic, bro. Like your mic.
It's fine. That's how it was before.
Nah, you need to bring it a bit closer.
Okay, done.
We're not actually gonna pick. Anyways, John, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's yeah. So 26. I'm a lawyer by trade. I've been married for a year and a half. I have a baby, my first due, God willing, in 10 days.
I'm sorry.
Between my grandparents, my mum and my sister, I'm a bit of a legacy in the Maronite community.
Thank
It's
God.
9 times out of 10 I'm addressed as not Jonathan, but either Honey's son, Mary's brother, or John and Marie Latouf's grandson. It's something in that vein.
Yes.
I think my favourite saint is Saint Pope John Paul the Great, the Second. I'm not sure what his
Both.
Yeah, the Great,
commonly
the
used
Second.
names.
Yes.
And I love the youth of our parish. I love it. Like young adults, teens, they're the beating heart of the church, and I love them heaps.
I agree with that statement, 100%. But in saying that, there's a more pressing topic, and that is you have a child that's coming. Have you
do.
thought about baby names?
We have.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, the wife and I have because we're keeping the sex a surprise.
Yes.
So the wife and I have a short list, a couple of names for whether it's a boy or a girl.
Are the names also a secret?
They are.
Okay.
I've been sworn. If there was, it's, you know what, if I was to tell someone like at work, that's one thing. If I was to break the oath I gave to Sel about the names on Triple C, it would be the shortest marriage ever.
Is
It would
Sel
end.
also a fan of Triple C, or is there a chance that she doesn't watch this episode or doesn't listen to this episode?
She listened to Will's one and to Simon Carrington's, I think, as well. So there's a very likely chance that she would listen to this after the fact and find out.
He's a very loyal man, so count your blessings, my dear. Count your blessings. All right. Although, firstly, it's good to have you as well. So
Thank God.
I completely forgot to greet you. I felt like a jerk in the beginning because I was kind of telling you to fix up your microphone. I didn't
It's
really. How you doing?
Thank God. Can't complain.
It's good to. We don't have James this time. Our producer's gone AWOL. We didn't pay him enough for this episode. That's a running joke now. Whenever somebody's missing, we just don't pay them enough. That's just a running joke. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much for your input. Okay, Jonah, let's start with, which I think is a very important part, your past and your journey to where you are now. Because, and this is just my humble opinion, I think it's going to set the context to what you actually do now, especially within the parish. Like, it will make a lot of sense. But, so let's start all the way from your high school years. Let's not go into infantry because we might be here forever just talking about you. In high school, what was your faith life like?
It was a part of my life, but very much based on obligation and, you know, doing things with the family. Really, I guess, head stuff more than heart stuff. And even now, you know, it's sometimes the heart's there and sometimes it's missing in action. But I think, yeah, in high school, it was, I would say my faith life was a little tumultuous. I had moments of, you know, real clarity and closeness. And at the same time, I think I was just struggling with so many things in my life that I really felt far away from God. I felt disconnected from God often. And I guess without diving too much, without reading my autobiography, as I like to say to certain people when I tell a story, you know, I was bullied quite a lot in high school, and there was a time for a good couple of years where I probably only had one friend at school, and you know, the rest of it was a pretty rough time. And at the same time, I think there was a lot happening at home before my parents split. So they probably split properly when I was in year 12. But so I think in terms of high school, it was difficult, I think. And so my faith life, I think, was really tethered to really good moments. And at the same time, I think there was a lot that was weighing down on it. And I didn't quite know the interaction between faith and what was going on in my life. And so probably the moments when I should have turned to God or prayed more or understood like that nexus between, you know, praying and asking for intercession and making my way through those periods of adversity, I didn't really have that. But it is worth saying that, like, I went to Redfield, and so, you know, having you know, Friday benedictions and school masses and priests on tap and confession and all those things, that when we talk about me coming back into the faith, so much of how that was such an easy process was because I'd had a really solid foundation and a familiarity with the church and the sacraments through school that I was then able to, I guess, leverage, or it made the process of coming back into my faith so much easier because it was like, oh, this is really familiar. Whereas I think if I'd gone to a different school where the sacramental life wasn't so interwoven in the school's culture and schedule and things like that, I think it would have been a lot more difficult.
We're going to pause here for a moment. Emma just gave me a call. Is she coming? Okay, let me call her. Sorry.
No, all good.
Welcome to Triple C.
It's a good pause because I need to put the rosaries at 9:30.
Trust. Let's see. I wouldn't be surprised if she's here.
Hello.
Hey, Emma, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Thank you, God. Are you joining us?
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I'm going to get inside.
That's perfectly fine. Altez, you want to go meet her? Altez is coming to get you right now, Emma.
Thank you very much. Sorry.
No problem at all. Don't be sorry. Bye-bye. I'm going to touch on a point, and I hope it doesn't get too sensitive, Jonah, but I do want to ask you, and I'm going to bring Altez into the conversation, that when you look at a gentleman that you are right now, and your astonishing size and your fantastic intellect, how the heck someone like you gets bullied is just like the living embodiment and testimony as to why you shouldn't bully anybody, like, ever. Because like you just don't know what the heck they're going to turn into.
Yep. It's I don't know. Looking back, you know, I honestly, hindsight, Stefan, is just, there's probably two things. Like, people say hindsight is 20/20, and I agree, but I think hindsight is also ruthless.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I think depending on what you are reminiscing or what you're turning over, if you regret something that you've done or you've said, hindsight, I think, is a bit of a double down, where in the same moment that you realize something that, you know, you should have done or you could have done better, there's also that double down of, I can't take it back, you know? And obviously you can try and make amends and apologize, but you cannot go back to the source and change what's happened. And there's probably another theory that I've got. I'm going to go off on tangents all the time.
That's perfectly fine. I look forward to hearing all of them.
I have a theory. I'm full of theories, as I tell the Redeemed kids all the time. It's like one of my catchphrases I use in my talks. But I've got a theory that I find with a lot of people, their relationship with God, or the way that they view the adversity and the sufferings in their life, particularly in the context of their faith and their relationship with God, is based on whether they've had the moment or the event or the experience where they've realized why they were required or why they needed to go through that suffering, or how that suffering happened to them in order to turn them into the person that they are today. And I think for me, I've had that moment. I've had that moment many times where I've realized that all of these things that happened to me made me into the person I am today. And so my perspective on the way that I've suffered or the adversity that I've experienced, I think now it's through the lens of, if those things hadn't have happened, I would be a completely different person.
I agree.
Especially when I think about being married to Sel. Just being married in general, I think that was a big moment for me, was just thinking, I wouldn't be the person that I am, capable of being married or making those decisions, if I hadn't have experienced what I'd experienced in my life.
Such an astonishing, and as well, it depends on how far you're willing to take it, but is it also that you have to maybe consider that you wouldn't have been able to even get to that moment if it wasn't for the suffering? Like if you look at your life almost as the way that God views it, could we, if we looked at it the way that God does, could it also be that this would not have been achievable if it wasn't for this suffering? Like God was just simply saying, you got no choice, bro. You got to go through this.
I definitely think it depends on the person. Definitely not a one size fits all approach. And I think it's also worth noting, and this is the thing that I've also realized is, yes, I've suffered. We all have. We've all gone through adversity, but I'm going to say two things. One of them is going to be, I think, a little controversial, but I think
that's what the middle C in Triple C stands for.
But I think there's probably two concepts that I think follow what you just said. The first is, not all suffering was created equal.
Absolutely.
Some suffering is worse than others.
Absolutely.
And all I can speak to is what I've experienced and how I've suffered.
If I can stop your thought process,
Of course.
because you're spot on in the sense that suffering has varying levels. Hey Emma, how you doing? We're just having
Hi,
a
what's
cracker
happening?
chat here. Don't be sorry at all. Do you want to take control as our special guest producer today?
Absolutely. I'll just pretend to be Michael for 10 minutes. What do you need? I just grew out my head.
By the way, Emma, you being a cyber engineer, you should be able to figure out what the heck is going on in front of you.
Same. I
Yeah. Anywho, I've got control of it here, but you're also more than welcome to change the scenes if you want to.
Yeah, thank you.
How exciting!
I know, it's like
We're having a cracking conversation about suffering.
Thank God.
Yeah, but anyway, sorry, I was halting your thought process because suffering, although there are varying levels, it's astonishing how an element of suffering for one is lesser in comparison to the same suffering for another person.
Suffering is relative, it's not absolute.
See, yeah,
And that actually, I think, ties perfectly into what my second point was going to
Yes.
be, which was, even though not all suffering was created equal, I think everyone's experience of suffering is very similar in terms of sometimes it can be all that you've known. If you look at your own suffering in a vacuum, and I look at mine and Alters, and when we all look at our own, our experience of suffering, I think, would be very similar, even though the nature of how we've suffered might be different. I'll give you an example, right? Some people weren't bullied at school, right? And, I was, and that was somewhere in a way that I suffer, and that was really difficult. But God's blessed me in that I haven't lost a grandparent yet. Oh, sorry, I have. I lost my grandmother last year. But thank you. But I think for me, before I'd lost her, I'd never experienced that before. But I think our experience of suffering is still similar, even though it's different, or even though one is worse than another. If you were to look at it, maybe even objectively.
I fully expected this conversation to go down this route, by the way. I fully expected. And by the way, we're waiting for your brilliant insights as well.
We're used talking without. I can't believe it. I'm not getting paid for this. No.
By the way, if you want to pay auteurs, please do sponsor Triple C. DM us. And we also have a special guest producer today, Emma. Thank you for joining
we did say we didn't have one before, but Emma made a
Yeah.
surprise
She rocked
visit. I can't. So I'm only speaking from I'm going to say my subjective opinion, in the sense of, and you probably know about this, when someone is going through something that I've been through, not disregarding their feelings or anything, but it's a matter of just get over it. In the most least insensitive way possible. Like, not get over it in the sense of don't worry, don't suffer, but like stop whinging. You know, there's far off worse people. Like, I don't mean to be insensitive at all, and not stop whinging. Like, it's a lack of better use of words, but it's like accept your suffering. I remember it was Saint John Paul II who said goodbye to a priest, and the priest was like, Pope, this might be the last time I see you. He looked at him, mind you, this is when St. John Paul II, maybe about months before he died, because he was really sick, said, why are you dying? And to the priest, which was a young priest, he goes, no, but you're sick. He goes, no, I'm okay. He goes, accept your suffering, like as much as you can. But in the sense of why I said it's relative, because me and Stefan and yourself have all lost grandparents within recently. We all had different experiences with it, and that's why I say it's relative, because without sounding so insensitive, and I'm sorry for my family members who watch this, it didn't affect me. Obviously, I didn't know him as well as you probably knew your grandparent, but it did not affect me as much as it affected my brother or my sisters. And we probably hadn't seen him. So, for example, me and my brother hadn't seen my grandmother for the same amount of time. But it affected him a lot more than it affected myself. And that's because people deal with suffering a little bit differently, or have a different approach to it, in the sense of they just have better coping mechanisms, or have been well equipped with their coping mechanism and they're comfortable with it. Whereas someone else might not have that comfort in their coping mechanism yet, or they haven't been exposed to a coping mechanism that they're comfortable with, if that makes sense.
Can I try and build a bridge? Because I do get where you're coming from, but I think getting over it...
No, that was a lack of better use of words.
So I was actually looking at suffering this semester at uni, and I was interested in knowing, and I was quite shocked in knowing that Aquinas' teaching about suffering is actually completely misunderstood. Not completely, but essentially what Aquinas would say is evil, if you want to put suffering as well in that category, is like a parasite. It needs to lynch on to goodness in order to be able to exist. It can't exist on its own accord. So is it possible that the people, and let's just say who suffer better, and when I think suffer better, I think Saint Rafka, for example, who suffered better, or was better equipped to deal with suffering. Is it not just possible that she has just surrounded herself more with the ultimate goodness, which is God? So in reality, all of this suffering...
Yes. No, I definitely agree with that.
So really, I don't know about you, John, but this is what I'm thinking. Really, we've just lost sight of heaven, by the sound of things.
Yeah. I remember actually I got asked this by, I don't know if she was
This is
agnostic
getting really deep. Thank you,
or
John.
atheist woman at my work. She no longer works there. But she goes, I can't fathom God, or there's an existence of God because of suffering. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, can you have pleasure without pain? She goes, no. I'm like, can you have rust if you never had metal? She goes, no. I'm like, so what makes you think you're going to have goodness without suffering? I mean, suffering only exists because goodness exists.
So so I get your point. So you're trying to say that the goodness had to
It's like
exist
darkness
first.
being the absence of light. It's almost like you identify it in the negative. It's in the absence of something else.
Yeah.
But see, that's why I like the Catholic perspective of suffering, because it brings you closer to the goodness through your suffering.
That's exactly what the saints saw.
But I think on that point though, and I think this dovetails into what you've both said, particularly what you were just saying, Alters, is people are equipped better or worse to deal with suffering, and that can be due to standard human defense mechanisms, like some people are just more emotionally wired than others. Then there's the faith element, which is I can make my way through this suffering because I understand that there's a higher purpose, there's a greater aim, there's a greater, there's a greater story here that, God is presiding over all of this. It's almost like a method to the madness that you can bring your faith to. But on the flip side, some people are inequipped for whatever reason to deal with suffering.
That's what I was saying before. And I think it came to the realization. I can't remember who I was watching, and he tied it kind of back to the book of Job in a way, but he didn't. I kind of got that idea from it, in the sense of he's like, I can lose everything, but I can never lose my faith. And I think that's what kept him grounded in his suffering, in his bad days, in his good days, in the sense of like, if I have a good day, I still have my faith. If I have my bad day, I still have my faith.
Yeah.
If I have a bang average day, I still have my faith. So I think it's finding that comfort in your faith and realizing you need no one but God or nothing
Emma,
but
can I
God.
trouble you something?
Yeah.
Thank you. Can you look up the country with the highest suicide rate?
Isn't
Probably
it
do it on
America?
your phone. It'll probably be easier for you if you do it on your phone.
Isn't it America?
We'll wait and see. And then look up the country with the lowest suicide rate as well. Because I think we're touching on something very deep and profound. How did we get on this topic?
I don't know. I was outside trying to find which
think-
game Emma was
I
at.
think it started with me talking about high school.
High school suffering? Yeah, I can see
about
the
10 minutes in between.
You're not going to like it.
Okay.
Lesotho is an African country.
Is the highest? Okay.
But then it goes Guyana, Eswatini, South Korea, Karabi, Lithuania, Slovenia, Russia, and then South Africa.
In terms of like the highest.
What's the lowest ever?
Like, because it's just interesting to know that even with those countries, they're not predominantly Christian countries. Canada? What the heck?
Yeah, but they're all.
Bloody Canadians are just chirping like all the bloody time.
I have two Canadian clients. They are the nicest clients I've ever met in my life. Hopefully they become Catholics. But
No, Greece.
Greece
I'm sorry.
is the lowest suicide rate.
Greece has the lowest.
Okay, it's kind of fitting in my point. Anyways, let's skip that part because it didn't really feel. Do you mind if we come back to the topic that we were talking with John, or do you want to say something else about suffering?
no, I'm easy.
You're good?
Let the conversation
Good.
flow.
There was a point I was sharing with John. I think that's how we kind of started this conversation. I was saying that, and I'll ask you this question. When you look at John now, would you think he got bullied?
Not really.
Why? And be completely honest. Just why?
Well, I'm a small bloke, so he's twice the size of me.
Yes.
In terms of height and muscle mass, probably. Just, I don't know, he's just a genuine nice bloke. I met him, I met Jono, just a bit of background. I met Jono this year. Earlier this year, Exodus 90.
Yep.
Exodus 90,
We'll get to Exodus 9.
yeah, we met over the phone actually. He just gave me a call and we didn't meet until maybe a month or maybe a bit more into Exodus 90. We went for coffee and breakfast at Our Lady. And then someone decided to join the party about 30, 40 days late to our
Look, bro, my partner
accountability partner. Stefan joined us late, but it's okay. He was always welcome.
Oh, thank you.
You
Appreciate that, Matthew, yeah.
you were. But no, I would never, just because of how nice he was and how genuine conversations we had. But other than that, yeah, just because he was like stature.
Yeah, it's a bit. So then I have a question. Why is bullying still a thing?
Oh, how much time do you have?
Well, you have plenty. That's the whole point of
I-
Triple C. We
it's-
have a lot.
It is worth saying though. Also, I think the third C for today should be compliments. Should be casual Catholic compliments. Stefan, you're beautiful. Alters, you have the most magnificent bone structure of anyone I've seen. Yeah.
You have great hair, Emma. God.
I didn't think I'd be walking into so much flattery on this particular talk.
Give me a couple more whiskeys. I might start insulting you. You never know.
Does Giselle watch Triple C?
She does.
Okay,
Yeah,
good
she
to know.
totally enjoys
We
it.
should
Only the
keep-
episodes I'm not on.
You should keep that in mind before you have too many drinks.
I have nothing but compliments for my wife while I'm live on a podcast.
Oh, thank God.
Actually, funny story. I was doing the talk a couple of weeks ago, and I was listing out everybody's good traits, their talents, and I said that Giselle, not only is she a good wife, but she's also a good crusher of pride, particularly my pride, which for some reason was taken more of an insult than it was a compliment. I think that's a great compliment. It's just my personal opinion. Anyways.
I think it's the way you used it.
Listen, it's not about me. It's about why does bullying still exist?
I think you look at 90, I reckon you look at it at least 90%. It's just an uneducated ballpark guess. I reckon 90% of all bullies are picking on someone who they think that they have power over because they are trying to cope with something out of their control at home. Whether it's an older sibling, an older cousin, a parent, there's some sort of power imbalance where they feel small and helpless and powerless, and that then plays out in how they find someone smaller and more powerless than them, and they pick on that person. I reckon you could bring that down to the vast majority of bullies. It's kids not knowing how to deal with things that are happening in their life, and so they just project and deflect and pick on someone else.
Have you heard of Fred Nietzsche?
No.
He was a German philosopher, late 19th century, early 20th century.
Okay.
Very early. He's famous for the quote, "God is dead. He remains dead and we killed him." He's famous for that quote. Anyways, he says that the meaning of life, since God doesn't exist, in accordance to his philosophy, of course it's absurd, but the meaning of life is power. And you should get rid of anything that inhibits your power. And you literally just described it, like perfectly right there. Like it's almost as if these kids have, because of their situation, come to the conclusion that power is the meaning of life. I need to find that power somewhere else.
I think it's just we're all insecure. You know, like how many times do you have the younger sibling who is picked on by their older brother or sister, and then they go after their younger sibling,
That's very true.
and down
Yes.
and round down the chain it goes, right? And I think it's
I'm the youngest, I was picked on by everyone then.
Sorry.
I'm really sorry. That was really sad.
No. My siblings never picked on me at all. I had 4 beautiful sisters and a brother. I still have them. They're still here with us, so thank God.
Thank God.
Thank you, God. But yeah,
Yeah, I think it's kids not knowing how to deal with what's going on at home, and so they need to feel, I mean, like kids are mean. Kids don't understand. Like Jordan Peterson speaks about this all the time.
Yeah.
I'm reading his book 12 Rules for Life.
can
at
you
the
tell me
moment.
how that goes? I've heard nothing but great things about that.
It's good. It's he writes like he talks.
Ah, okay.
And I think it's awesome. Like you sort of feel like he's on a bit of a tangent or a ramble sometimes, but I think for me, I've always liked the way that he describes situation and the way he speaks and is able to sort of paint a bit of a word picture and draw on an analogy.
I think he's a bit of a deductionist. I think he really likes to break things down.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But each of the 12 rules is written as an independent essay on each rule.
Oh wow!
And so
okay.
there's actually a really nice sort of like intellectual structure, so you can tell, like, again, he writes like he speaks, so it feels like a bit of a stream of consciousness, but there is, through storytelling and through his own, his own methods of breaking down situations and people and characteristics, that he does sort of bring you from, point A to B in bringing his point across. But he talks, I'm reading one rule at the moment about, it involves the aspect of like raising kids. And he says that effectively it's a parent's job to teach their children how to behave in a civilized social society. Because if a parent fails to do that, then the child will be ostracized by society forever. Because they will not be able to interact and engage in discourse and be among others. Like you think about the kid who doesn't share, for example. If that behavior, and again, kids don't really know. That's the thing, is they're formed by their parents. Their parents, educate them on what to and what not to do. But let's say a child doesn't share and that behavior is never fixed. And so they go their whole life behaving in a particular way. How does that play out then in adulthood? They don't like working with others. They're self-absorbed. They don't understand the concept of being selfless or putting one's needs above their own. And he uses this phrase, and I'm going to butcher it because I can't remember it properly, but he essentially says that society will punish those people who are unable to be civilized people and who are unable to be productive members of society.
Man. Do you like Jordan Peterson?
I love Jordan Peterson.
Can I ask a really deep question? Because we're all Catholics in this room. Why do we like Jordan Peterson so much?
I only like him. I started listening to him probably 2 years ago now, a year and a half ago. I enjoyed his journey going from not being a believer. I reckon he was a believer back then, but he just didn't know what to say and how to say it and how to actually comprehend it. I love his ideology in the sense of he doesn't know if there's a God out there, but he acts like there is, in the sense of like he just wants to be a great person. He wants to actually do good within the world, but then just the fact that he's able to call a black sheep and not have to sugarcoat it for anyone. And I think he had a conversation with a Canadian lady, and she said, "Don't you care about offending others in the way, like for the transgender, for example, and not referring them to other proper pronouns?" He goes, "But what about them offending me?" And so forth. So that's why I'm so opposite, as you already know, from being friends with me for so long, is the sense of I like someone that doesn't have a filter and that does not care, as long as it's truth and doesn't effectively put someone down on purpose. But just the fact that he's so wise, yet he's kind of on our level as well. Without being a fully, I don't know, is he a Catholic? No, I know his wife is, or
I don't think so. And look, some things that some of the interviews that he's done recently give plenty of reason to dislike him or to disagree with some of the things that he said, particularly around like homosexual marriage. He did an interview recently with he's a gay guy, his name Ruben someone. He was involved with the Daily Wire for a while, and he. Unfortunately, a lot of what he said morally I would disagree with, and most Catholics would. But why I like him is he is no nonsense. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He's not afraid to rustle some feathers, and he calls it how it is, especially in the anti-PC, anti-woke methodology that he has. Like he's not going to restrict what he says and play by the rules of not offending people. If the truth is the truth, he's gonna, he calls it like he sees it, and I think that's particularly useful because he's become, in some respects, I think, a real champion of free speech, and not only free speech in, I guess, a society that if you don't say the right things, you're gonna get cancelled or shut down or demonetized or whatever, but also free speech in terms of, he's a champion for the battle of ideas and the place for political discourse. And, he speaks a lot about the, increasing polarization of American politics, especially between young people in schools and universities, where there's no meeting in the middle anymore. There's no grand debate where people can bring their ideas and, bring them out in the social circle and, in the great amphitheaters and, really think the way that, especially talks about the Greeks quite a lot, these champion thinkers, these great philosophers. We've lost that because of identity politics and because of, shutting down someone's ideas because of who they are or what they are and things like that. So that's where I like him, is he calls it like he sees it, and he's not afraid of being shut down or demonetized. He's not really afraid of anyone, if that makes sense.
There's an article that Christian Stevens wrote. I don't know if you guys have ever met him. He's Monsignor Shaw's nephew.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, you've met Christian before. He's a lecturer at Notre Dame. Anyways, he wrote an article about the recent synod that we had here. And he essentially said, and he compared it to Jordan Peterson. Listen to what he says about Jordan Peterson. He's comparing the two. He said, just a week or two back, Professor Jordan Peterson released a video he entitled A Message to the Christian Churches. Within 24 hours, it had 650,000 views. 54,000 people had liked the clip. To like a clip is a key metric in social media success. Yes. In the same period, it garnered 10,000 comments from around the world. The comments are filled with personal testimonies by laity and clergy alike, non-believers going to the church for the first time, and believers waking up from periods of lukewarmness. After reading comments for an hour, I encountered none that were negative. What was Peterson, a non-Catholic, and he really stresses that point, saying to people that resonated so strongly? And then he goes on to actually list what you guys have actually been talking about. Like, for example, we live in a culture of soft nihilism and postmodernism. So Peterson combats against that. Young men in particular are the targets of such propaganda and are most disdained by its proponents. Men are being picked on. Peterson is trying to uplift them. So, I guess what Christian is trying to say, in which I can actually see more and more why Jordan Peterson is becoming more popular, is because he's actually speaking about the things that are indeed impacting Christian lives.
100%.
Whereas it seems like, and it's not the church, but it just seems to be that the leaders within the church sometimes almost don't have a single clue about what's actually going on. So they've referred and they've decided to go and watch a non-Catholic who agrees a lot with Christian principles, but doesn't outright say it. And I love how Dr. Peter Kreeft describes him. Conceptually, he's a Christian. Faith-wise, he's not.
I agree.
Yeah,
he's almost like an honorary Catholic.
Exactly right.
He agrees with everything except probably the existence of, or really the belief in God.
Yes.
So I know he's mentioned beforehand that if there was any religion that was actually,
He'll be Catholic.
If he was going to be any religion, he would be Catholic.
Yes.
And I think, to be honest, and this is probably the most disappointing, I guess, part of this, one of them in my view at least, is if he was to come out as Catholic, his following would reduce by 80%.
I don't think so, but
We've got good. We've got disagreement. I like this.
I have a feeling I'm going to agree with what you say, but just from my view, because he's arguing common sense, morality, and logic, really from a non-Catholic perspective, because he's not saying the Bible says. He's just talking common sense and logic. People are like, oh yeah, I can agree with that because blah, blah, blah. But as soon as he becomes Catholic, I feel like implicitly, like with most Catholics, it's, your source of truth and authority is from the Bible, something that I either don't recognize as having authority or disagree vehemently with. Therefore, I'm not going to listen to a thing that you say. Whereas I think he's sort of teetering that line where he's, the majority, I'd say, of what he believes is Catholic, but he's not Catholic. I think if he were to then become a Catholic, I think a lot of people would get rid of him because a lot of people are anti-Catholic or anti-religious. There's a stigma there. But I don't know. I'll tell us your thoughts.
But the people who disagree with him now are probably the ones who are anti-Catholic. The people who agree with him now are probably the ones who are like, you know what? There probably is a God out there. We don't know where it is. Probably on the same boat as him. I reckon that's a good portion of his following. Another good portion is probably the Christians, just your typical non-Catholic Christians. And then another very good portion is your Catholics. But what I think will happen is I'm gonna put it as a fraction of a Guadalupe-like event, in the sense of there'll be so many more conversions because this man of such brilliance has become a Catholic, and would he lose some viewers? Yeah, like everyone would. But if, imagine like your Hollywood stars, like for example, look when Justin Bieber started to go to Hillsong. How much did the Hillsong Church rise in the sense of its attendance and followers? You know, you got other things like, for example, Kanye West when he did that atrocious Sunday service thing where Catholics started saying, "Oh no, he wasn't doing good. I'm so sorry, but he was not doing good in that Sunday service thing." It was a point where he started calling himself Jesus and Saint Paul at the same time. But how much of an impact did it? No one looked at the Bible in a negative way, even though the Hillsong and Kanye used what they called the Bible. Obviously, they had some books missing. We can go into that discussion a bit after.
Can I disagree with you, Otos?
You can.
Thank you. I think that runs a risk of reducing, if we focus mainly on Catholicism, as a trend.
Yes and no.
Okay. When you say that, that means...
No, I know where you're coming from and I agree with that, but the reason why I disagree with it is not, like, his following now is not because he's trending. His following now is because he's speaking truth. And whether he's getting his truth from his experience or just his research or his studies, or whether he's getting it from the Bible, the guy is speaking truth. Like, he's spitting out words of wisdom that when I listen to him, I'm like, oh my God, like,
yeah, I know.
why have I never thought of it like that?
But with all due respect, like, anybody can kind of speak truth. Like, if we're gonna base it on truth,
I know what you mean, but this man is speaking it in such a way that even, like you said, some clergy members haven't seen it like that. And, well, not you said, but you referenced. But I just personally think that he will get a lot more popular. I reckon not only in the Catholic community, but in the Christian community as well. Maybe not in the atheist community as much, obviously, for obvious reasons. But I don't think he will drop by a lot.
Yeah, look. I think at the end of the day, it's nothing more about a theory and a concept. Emma, our guest producer has a point. Yes.
I work with a lot of conservative atheists, like a lot of them, and I'm telling you, you're underestimating how many people dislike Catholics. Like if he converted, people would stop listening to him.
Yeah, but
it almost invalidates his opinion in their eyes.
Yeah, that's a valid
I
point.
agree. I agree.
I think then the issue isn't that if he converts, then people will follow or people won't follow. I think there's just a stigma that unfortunately we might have painted of ourselves that we're not actually logical. Like I don't know. I don't know about you, but people are kind of shocked when all of a sudden you tell them that you're Catholic, and then all of a sudden you start to speak reason. And you're like, what? Like you lot speak reason? Yeah. I once had a chat with a workmate, and he asked me, why doesn't the Catholic Church just approve of homosexual marriage? And I just used a philosophical example. I just said, well, if God is a constant and he doesn't change, then if the church changes, it means either God is wrong, which is absurd, or God changes, which is equally as absurd. And he turned around and said, I like that because he used common sense. But that's what I'm saying. I'm still Catholic. He liked it, and I'm still Catholic.
Yeah, no, I know that, but yeah. I'm saying that I don't think his fans are who his main base of supporters that agree with him. I don't think they're all conservative atheists who disagree with him. Otherwise, they won't support him. It will be illogical to support.
No. Emma's not saying that. Emma is saying that
people have an issue with Catholics.
Yeah, people have it, even with Christian. But I think that's come about because you went from an era, with all due respect, you went from an era, you had St. Augustine, you had St. Albert the Great, you had St. Thomas Aquinas, you had St. Bonaventure, you had Blessed John Duns Scotus, you had these absolute scholars who quite literally built the foundations of Western civilization. And then you had this utter fragmentation within Christianity that led to, unfortunately, some absurd statements said by other Christian denominations, in which you would agree with 100%.
Oh, 100%.
And what is inevitably done is it's kind of, even though we look at it as there's disunity, everyone else looks at it as they're all Christians. So stupidity that happens within the Christian world automatically gets placed on us.